Hello and welcome to the Off the Cuff podcast. Today we're lucky enough to have Hugh Evans. Hugh is well respected in both politics and business. As a special advisor in the Blair years, both in the Home Office and Number 10, he was at the strategic centre when Labour had its biggest majority in history. After this, he spent many years representing the UK's world-leading insurance and long-term service industry to ministers, parliamentarians, regulators and senior stakeholders as Director General at the ABI. He's now a partner at KPMG. Welcome, Hugh.
Thanks very much, Fiona. It's great to be with you.
Excellent stuff. So as I said in my introduction, you've gone from working to the Home Office and Number 10 to Director General of the ABI. You're now a partner at KPMG. So can you tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have had lots of interesting opportunities. I did a history degree, which led into local journalism. And local journalism then led into being a press officer for the Labour Party at the point at which it was about to win, as you say, a very large majority. And that over time led to the amazing chance to be a special advisor in the Home Office and Number 10 in the second and beginning of the third terms of that Labour government. I left that in 2006 when I had an opportunity to go into the city where I joined a bank as a strategy manager and basically reskilled myself, learn about financial services and try and develop some different skills and abilities. And that led to the insurance sector, which I was lucky enough to represent at the ABI, as you said, and more recently to work with through KPMG.
Now, going back to your political career, what was the moment you most savoured whilst you were working as a special advisor?
I think it was really the responsibility that you have. It's a tremendous honour to be one of the last people that a Secretary of State or a Prime Minister speaks to before they make a decision. Of course, there are, particularly in the Prime Minister's case, there's lots of people who are in that position, but it's still a huge privilege and a responsibility. And I think you've got to enjoy that. I always really appreciated the fact that I was in a position and I took that responsibility very seriously in terms of how well informed I was and trying to always have a balanced and thoughtful perspective to give ministers that would help them do their incredibly important jobs better. On a personal level, just the opportunity as an amateur historian to work in some of those buildings, particularly in Number 10. And particularly in my case, I did 2 summers as the duty spad in Number 10, and I pretty much had the building to myself with a handful of other people. And the opportunity to wander around at lunchtime and look at all the pictures on the walls and just be in the building without it being quite as busy was an absolute honour that I've never forgotten.
And what do you think the Labour government at that time will be remembered for?
It's a good question. I mean, I think when that government came to an end, most people thought it would mainly be remembered for the Iraq war on the downside and for the Northern Ireland peace process on the upside. But I think the further away we get from it and see just how difficult government can be for either party, there's probably a bit more of a collective memory of it as a time when we had a relatively well-run government that was business friendly, that attracted a lot of inward investment, and when there was a lot of focus on developing high quality public services.
So that's what you think it should be remembered for?
I think it should be remembered for that, but there are also a lot of other things which are now taken for granted, which it did: the minimum wage, ensuring single-sex partnerships, reforming sex offences, in the Home Office getting rid of the double jeopardy rule so that when new day and evidence came to light, people could be held accountable for crimes that may have been committed 30 years ago. These were all things that the Labour government took incredibly seriously and legislated for, which are now just taken as part of a modern civilised society. And I do think that was a guiding principle for the government at the time.
And Tony Blair, of course, was an expert of being a strategic communicator, from advocating for the change of the party name for Labour Party to New Labour as a way of convincing the electorate that the party was headed in a better direction, and also bringing both sides of the party together. So how hard was it to maintain consensus behind the scenes in order to maintain such support both in and out of the Houses of Parliament?
Well, I think it's a feature of our British electoral landscape, and obviously our electoral system contributes to this, that we have 2 principal parties that are both very broad churches. So I think whichever of the 2 biggest parties are in government, there is always a dynamic going on within those parties to build consensus, to try and keep as much of the party behind the government's agenda. And the new Labour government was no different. All that was different about it was the numbers were bigger. There was a considerably larger group of people for the most part to engage with and communicate with. But my experience as a special advisor was, and as a press officer during that period, was always that the ministers who spent the most time in Parliament and genuinely treated their fellow parliamentarians with respect and with dignity and spent time with them were largely able to rely on their support because they understood what they were trying to achieve and they were prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt, usually even if they didn't agree. Where people tried to cut that process, jumped too far ahead and didn't bother to spend time with their parliamentary colleagues, they tended to come unstuck a bit more.
And was Blair a conviction politician, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, both in his conviction that the Labour Party had to fundamentally modernise or it would die, and he, like many politicians of his generation, was fundamentally shaped by the 1980s and the sort of civil war within the Labour Party and the battle against Millicent. And secondly, in his conviction that in a very fast-changing world, the role of the state and in that the role of the Labour Party was to help modernise. Although modernisation in the 1990s looked somewhat different from where it does now, it's no surprise that now in the TB Institute, he is an advocate of how AI can revolutionise public services. He has always believed in the UK being a modern country that seeks to transform and change both its civic and business infrastructure to be at the front of global developments, not least in technology, rather than behind them.
And they say a week is a long time in politics. So, what incident or change of direction had the biggest impact on his convictions and why?
I think the 1980s shaped that whole generation of politicians: Tony Blair, David Blunkett, Margaret Beckett, Jack Straw, Alistair Darling. They were all in slightly different places during that period, and that was one of the interesting things. But they came together to create New Labour out of a firm belief that the Labour Party had to look forward and it had to be in the centre of British politics. And they drove that very successfully, not least all as very capable individuals leading important departments of government. That was the thread that knitted through that Labour government. And with it was a strong belief in Britain and Britain as a global power, as a soft power, as a place of innovation, as a place where capital could be invested, and as a place also where quality of public services and social justice was important. And those were founding principles of the Labour Party that had attracted many of those people into politics in the first place.
Do you think politics has changed with the rise of social media and the 24-hour news cycle?
Well, undoubtedly, right? I mean, it's speeded up for a start. It's made it easier for conspiracy theorists to spread nonsense. It's made it harder, I think, for complicated conversations to happen about very difficult areas of public policy where there are trade-offs involved that have to be debated and have to be worked through. And in a social media echo chamber where everyone's shouting loudly at each other, that is much, much harder. So I think social media, in some respects, democratizes politics. Obviously, it makes the spread of correct information easier. But there's so much more disinformation, falsehoods, and conspiracy theories out there. I think it makes democratic politics harder, not easier.
And moving from politics to business, what is it like going from one to the other?
It's not an easy transition, but it is a worthwhile one. And I do think it's good for both business if more people who've had a political background work in it and vice versa. I think if you move from politics into business, you've got to be prepared for a bit of a status shift, particularly if you come out from being a special advisor and you're right at the top of the government tree. As often in life, you have to be prepared to put your ego to one side, roll up your sleeves and learn some new skills and work alongside people who are testing you to see whether you're any good. I think you have to have a manageable ego to move across, and you have to have an appetite to learn some new skills and to be humble about what you don't know. And I think if you take all those things in and you choose the sector that you're interested in, then I think you've got a good chance of being successful.
Is that why you think more people don't go into business from politics, because of big egos?
I think that's a bit simplistic, but I think it's hard. It's always difficult to make these choices in life. There aren't also easy pathways across. I was lucky in terms of some of the introductions that were made for me, but it's not always easy to find a route in to do a job at the heart of business. Obviously, sometimes to move into corporate affairs roles, but not in terms of strategy or at the heart of a business. So I think it's quite hard to do, and I think that's probably a bigger thing, as well as a gamble for many people. But I would always advocate it if you're keen and thinking of doing that, because I think it's hugely worthwhile. You learn a lot, and business also helps the world go around. Politics makes the world go around, but so does business. And it's really good to be able to work in business as well as politics.
You talked about learning new skills. What skills do you think are transferable from politics and what's not?
Definitely the ability to deal with pressure and to be quite resilient, because if there's one thing that politics at the top level is, it's relentless. The ability you learn to sort of try and read a room and the people skills you develop. Good EQ is important in business and it's absolutely essential in politics. I think also the ability to sort of assess information, summarize it, work that through. Those are all valuable skills. But the other thing that I think is really important is that you're interested in the sector you're moving to. Business isn't just one amorphous blob, it's made up of different parts of the economy. And I would have not been interested in going into deep mining engineering, for example. That's not my cup of tea at all. Whereas financial services, I did like the idea of, because it's about people and about services that people use every day. And to me, that seemed quite interesting in terms of what made people tick and what products could be developed to serve them better. That to me seemed like a very interesting segue from politics.
You spent a number of years at the ABI. What's the most important piece of work you did whilst there?
Probably Flood Re, which was the public-private partnership that I and several others worked very hard to deliver, which enables people who live in very high-risk flood households to be able to get affordable and available flood insurance. That didn't exist, and a group of us, the leading insurers, got together, worked very closely with the coalition government to create it, and it went live in 2016, and it's been a success and helped well over 500,000 households who would otherwise not be able to get affordable insurance to get it. Also, during the COVID-19 challenges, we set up a COVID-19 relief fund with the insurance industry, which raised £90 million and helped 15 different charities who might otherwise have gone under keep going. And then finally, I think, there was a huge set of pension freedoms introduced by George Osborne when I was at the ABI. And, I and others worked very hard to work with the industry so that those could be introduced successfully, despite the fact that we hadn't been given any warning they were coming. And that was an important thing to get right, because you're talking about people's retirement savings. It's really important that the framework worked at the point at which it went live.
That's quite a range of work that you've done, though. How has that provided a framework for your recent move to KPMG?
I think the benefit of working at an industry trade body for a long time in a senior role is it gives you a depth of industry knowledge that then helps you work in that sector going forward. You have a memory about lots of things, as well as obviously a network of people who you know. And I think to be a good business consultant, you have to understand the sector that you are advising, and you have to have been around it for quite some time. That's the thing that trade body work gives you if you then choose to move into consulting, as I was lucky enough to be able to do.
So you've helped those who obviously wouldn't have otherwise been able to get insurance. You have made sure that people can make use of their pension changes. So what other things do you feel the UK PLC needs to do to ensure it's prosperous for all?
Attract capital and inward investment. We have to be one of the best places in the world to do business and to run a business. Without that, that capital can go anywhere in the world, and sometimes it does. And I think we've sometimes lost sight of that at points in recent years. I think we have to be a place that offers good quality jobs. Our route to prosperity is not being a sort of low wage economy. We have to be better at being regionally spread. The UK is a place full of vibrant cities and towns and different and with very strong regional and national identities. And I think we need economic prosperity and growth to be spread much more evenly across the United Kingdom than we have perhaps in the past. And I think we have to be prepared to invest for the long term in the civic and transport infrastructure that's needed for modern Britain. And that's something that our predecessors did tremendously well, particularly the Victorians. Sometimes we need a bit more of that ambition in terms of trying to make sure that we have a country that's going to work economically in the 21st and 22nd centuries.
And how is insurance important to this?
Well, without insurance, businesses can't operate. The world can't operate. Businesses can't grow and take on risks without commercial insurance to back them up. Individuals can't work and retire without the role of life insurance. And the insurance industry itself is a tremendously important investor, particularly in long-term projects, and a huge part of the resilience of the UK and the wider global economy. So the insurance industry is critical to this, and we are lucky that in the UK we are the world leading centre of international wholesale insurance, with both the fourth largest insurance market in the world, but we are the world leader for international global insurance. And, we need to build on that for our own UK advantages, as well as remain a leading part of the global economy.
I was going to come on to that next, what work you do with other organisations and countries on this issue in order to make sure that UK PLC plays its part.
I think the most important thing I can help contribute with others is to make sure that the UK insurance market is continuing to be as innovative as possible in developing insurance products that meet the risks of the 21st century. The insurance industry has always been fantastically adaptable, from fire risk in the 17th century through to, moving from the age of horse-drawn carriages to motor and aviation in the 20th century. The 21st century, we need to become much better ensuring intangible assets, digital assets that will increasingly make up more of the world's wealth. And I think that's a critical challenge the insurance industry has to meet if it wants to be as relevant and systemically important in the years ahead as it has been historically.
So looking back over your entire career, what's the hardest challenge you had to overcome?
In the early days, it was probably connectivity. I didn't know anyone. So I'll always be grateful to the newspaper editor who gave me my first job straight out of university, and the people in the Labour Party who took a punt on me to join as a press officer. And then, like most other working parents, there have been moments of challenge and occasionally crisis where work and family responsibilities collide in a fairly dramatic fashion, and you're managing to not be a terribly good employee or a terribly good parent or a terribly good husband. And I've had my share of those, I'm afraid to say, and sometimes handled them better than others.
What do you think the most important lesson you've learned is?
The thing I always say to people when I work with them, or occasionally sort of mentoring or informal advice, is reputation. You must guard your reputation above all else and behave accordingly. This is an interconnected world, and if you behave badly, you treat people poorly, you do poor work, word will get round and people will find out. So from a professional perspective, as well as it being the right thing to do, it's also in your self-interest to protect your reputation and to always behave as if you are under the spotlight, and to do the right thing. You would be comfortable anyone examining at any point in time. And like everyone, I've got my faults and there's things I wish I've done that I haven't done. But I think, as a way to try and operate, that's still always my advice to other people. And some of the best advice I've been given is around that as well.
Obviously, earlier on in the interview, you mentioned a number of different people within the Labour Party who you have worked with. Is there anyone specific who you really admire and has influenced your journey?
There were a couple of very influential people in my time with the Labour Party, and one would be the late David Hill, who died last year, who was the number 10 comms director and director of communications at the Labour Party when I first worked there. He was a man of enormous integrity who spoke to literally tens of thousands of journalists through the course of his career and had an unimpeachable reputation for telling the truth and being a straight dealer. And I admired that, and I learned a lot from him. And David Blunkett showed me what high performance leadership really looks like. This was somebody who was a fantastically able, hardworking and successful Home Secretary who did so overcoming a disability, of which meant he had to work twice as hard as everyone else, and who I saw under moments of immense pressure act as a hugely responsible, thoughtful and decisive leader. So I learned a lot from him about a top quality A++ leader looks like.
And do you feel positive about the future?
Yes, I try to. I mean, there's plenty of reasons for doom and gloom, but actually, if you look at it from a historical perspective, particularly those of us who live in the West and live in the UK, we're lucky enough to live in one of the richest countries in the world at a time when human healthcare has never been better, human connectivity has never been better. So I think if you look at it from a slightly more historical perspective, it's a bit more easy to feel positive that this is still actually a good time to be alive. Good dental care as well, which is one of the reasons I wouldn't have fancied living in previous centuries. That's not to be complacent about some of the challenges the world faces, not least over global warming. But I do think sometimes we need a bit of a perspective check, particularly for those of us lucky enough to live in the UK in the 21st century, that in the whole span of human history, this is a time that most human beings, if they had the choice, would choose to be alive.
Hugh, it's wonderful to hear your wide-ranging insight into how Whitehall really works, the principles on which you've run your career, and how people should work together for the good of UK PLC. Thank you to the listeners of this podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If you think it's worth coming back, please like and subscribe. If you feel that you need something to tide you over to the next podcast, please buy my book Party Games on Amazon. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Have a good week, one and all.